is to really be able to say we are speaking from a position of both knowledge and authority on these topics. And I think that's going to be part of, hopefully, what we'll talk about tomorrow, how to actually influence the culture of education in Asia broadly, and actually to influence the educational system in the US and Europe as well. Because while, sometimes it's sort of held as some kind of standard, there are gaps, and the same problems that are focused here, you'll see as I spit talk that are happening over there. And finally, I'm very excited that we're able to participate in a workshop in which we get to experience what it's like to be students and be educated in this kind of field. Okay, so why medical humanities? It's a heterogeneous group of people, group of disciplines. It's by nature interdisciplinary. You have to have people like anthropologists, sociologists, physicians, disability activists. You have to have literary scholars all at the table together. And I think that's hard to do because we're all siloed. We all live in our own disciplinary environment. And we don't like to step outside of that. It's uncomfortable. So one of I think the crucial things about medical humanities is you have to let yourself be a little uncomfortable with the situation. A key aspect to this is vulnerability. And I mean that in a very broad sense. One of the features that brings most of the practitioners in medical humanities together is the stressing the idea of the vulnerability of all bodies. We're all vulnerable, right? We're all going to die. Despite our techno-scientific imagination, immortality is not going to be bequeathed to us, certainly not in our lifetimes. And I think I can say that statement over and over and over again. So to be able to take stock of that, to understand that, to appreciate that as a universal principle is, I think, critical. But linked to the universal nature of vulnerability is that certain groups are more vulnerable than others. Right? The kind of marginalization of peoples throughout the world, whether that's because of class, caste, race, gender, all of those things sort of go into making some people more vulnerable than others. And marginality, I think, is sort of central to this. May or may not have heard of the idea of structural determinants of health. A colleague of mine, Jonathan Metzl, published a paper on this, and just the notion that health is not situated simply in the body, but in larger structures, and those structures are usually structures of power. The question of access to fresh food, the question of access to water, what kinds of government policies allow certain people to have certain kinds of health. As medical humanists, we have to be thinking about this. Again, empowerment goes back to the idea both of marginalized people, but of all people. Just being able to be your own advocate for your own health needs. These two go together, I think, the critical historiography and a kind of contingent framework. The idea here is simply a kind of constructivist approach, that health is not a kind of natural fact, right? That it is a socially and aesthetically and historically contingent and created fact. So we can kind of get into that too. Ultimately, these are about questions like improving patient care, improving self-care. Just a quick graph, right? So this, on the left-hand side, you have the number of medical humanities baccalaureate programs in the United States. And you can see there's a kind of takeoff, right, around, kind of exponential growth in the 90s, and then really kind of jumping up now. So where we are now is we have about 68 different programs of different kind of qualities, of different level of sophistication, but there's clearly a desire and interest, and we're kind of, I think, right at that space. I started my program around 2012. So it's called Medicine, Literature, and Society. It's an undergraduate major track, soon to be a major this year at Columbia University in the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society. And the idea is relatively simple. It's looking at health in the body from the twin perspectives of social forces and aesthetic forces. But to do that, what I had to do is kind of reach out to all the other spokes in the wheel at Columbia and abroad. But I've given you sort of a simple smidge of the kind of people I've had to work with in the last 5 years to develop the program in a way that I thought would be most sophisticated. It's not enough for me to say that I know what these things are. I'm not a sustainable development expert or an anthropologist or a historian or a sociologist. or a public health expert, or a philosopher, or an economist. There are many, many things I'm not, right? And that's, I think, one of the things that I'm most kind of comfortable saying. But I want all of that in. We have this sort of traditional notion of departments and disciplines, and they're probably about 150 years old, but they aren't natural, right? The idea that an English department lives here, or a history department lives here. So I kind of like to think about an educational format that's different from traditional departments, one that's maybe more problem-focused. So all of these kind of groups of people are involved. This is kind of the sort of major, we can talk about this later, but there are a number of kind of tracks that the students can take, anywhere from kind of disability studies to comparative public health to narrative medicine. And these are just some of the classes that I've taught in the last 40 years. I'm looking at risk from the perspective both of an epidemiologic risk, but also from an affective and emotional point. And technology sort of being a kind of central focus of mine in my writing. Another program that we've been developing at Columbia is something called narrative medicine. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with the term, but it was inaugurated and developed around 2000 at Columbia University. We have a master's program now that started 3 years ago. About 50 students a year are getting masters in narrative medicine. In the medical school itself, there are weekly, once-a-week sessions in narrative medicine, and there are electives, poetry, philosophy of death, that all students have to take. And the basic, simple tenet of narrative medicine is that you can sort of apply the principles of reading and writing. Good. Yeah. You can apply the principles of reading and writing to patient care in some format that allows you to develop a stronger affiliation with your patients. And we can, if you have any questions, I can talk to you about how we kind of do that directly. And then we'll just kind of move forward into some other initiatives that we're in the process of putting together. So this is an interdisciplinary conference that we'll have back at Columbia at the end of March that I put together with a few fellow colleagues that are listed at the bottom, Arden, Heidi, Joel, and Lan. And here what we've done is try to, again, really inhabit the idea of an interdisciplinary communication. So in each one of these sessions, we have people from different fields. So in one field, in one session, we have a neuroscientist talking to a literary scholar. In another session, we have an anthropologist talking to a public health historian to kind of bring out these sort of conjunctions. About a year ago, I started an online journal. It's called Synapsis. Initially, it was sort of called Department Without Walls. We launched it a year ago. Within 9 months, we've had 50,000 visits, unique visits. So it's sort of taken on, and there's a lot of interest. One of Harvard students writes for my journal, Amala, so that's great. We have 14 interdisciplinary writers. They are people who are situated in one discipline, whether it's neuroscience, anthropology, history, sociology, but have an interest in health and the body. And they write sort of one column a month each. And we'll be doing a print edition of the sort of first year, sort of best of, by Palgrave next year. So there's kind of there's a big interest in these kinds of things. I mean, many publishers come to me regularly about doing kind of more work in the medical humanities. It seems like they're being asked by various libraries and institutions, and there isn't as much out there as you would think. As I showed, this is a real field that we're kind of in the process of developing, all of us. Just some other things to think about how the reach of this is not just centered in New York or the United States. I'm working with colleagues at the Southern Dental University, the CU, on developing a medical humanities curriculum for their university. We call it Human First. It's going to be a 6-week mandatory course, and you'll see this kind of notion of mandatory comes up a lot in my approach to this, because if all you do is ask the students who are interested to join you, you'll get those same 8 or 10, 12 students who will always show up to these things. What you really need to do is bring in all of those people who don't otherwise feel like this is a critical, crucial aspect of their growth. So we made sure that it was a mandatory course. We're doing joint faculty. This is also, I think, really critical. Who's supposed to teach this? You know, is it physicians? Is it the humanities scholars? Is it neither? Is it both? And I think we have to think about expertise and where that expertise lies. This isn't the expertise generally of physicians to teach these things. We do need the actual kind of tenets and approaches that the humanities bring. So I'm working with 3 or 4 different people at SDU's English department and their medical school faculty to put together. One aspect is kind of home visits. So we have students, all of them follow one patient for their first year and a half. And they do some reflective journaling, but then we actually do actual seminars in class. And I think that's it. So, that's where I was at. But just to kind of put it out there that this is a kind of space of tremendous growth, right? I didn't mention on here, in June, I will be in Paris to do a summer school that's related with Reed Hall, actually, the Paris Global Center, where we're doing a conference on refugee health. And then we're going to follow that with 3 days of teaching of the medical humanities. And the minute we opened up a 3-day course, sort of 50 people applied to be in that course. So there's a dramatic, deep need that speaks, I think, to a sense of loss, a sense of the profession as not really, while technologically and technically we are doing incredible things, and I think I never forget to say those, right? The ability to cure childhood leukemia is incredibly important. We can't ignore the fact that there are these true revolutionary technological advances. But at the same time, there's this deep sense that something is being lost in the technologization and the technical aspects of medicine. And I think people are reaching out for that. So I'm hoping that this 2 days is kind of the launch of something that doesn't end here, that sort of starts here. And that's it. That's all I got. So thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for making all the travels. If anything comes up, like I said, like Ravina said, just let us know. We want this to be comfortable and easy for you. And given how beautiful the center is, I think that's a great way to start. So again, thank you very much. If there's specific questions, we have a little bit of time before the next session. If anybody has anything specific, or we can kind of move on. Yeah.
How long has the idea of practice of method management been around in the US or in India specifically?
I mean, so there's like mutterings in the literature. You can look back into the 70s and 80s. There was a notion of a kind of old boys club where doctors that felt like they played the piano, felt like there was some value there. I mean, we can go back to Osler in America, right? If you really want to. Sort of Osler talks about literature and the kind of value of writing. His writing himself, like us, is quite literate and quite thoughtful. So there is a historical tradition of this, but I think the kind of changes in medical education, there was rumblings in the 80s, but it's really much more recent. So the narrative medicine program at Columbia, which is really the first of its kind, was started in 1999 or 2000. And I think that if you look at the kind of graph and the growth of programs in the United States, that actually does kind of really target the moment in which that expansion started to happen. So we're really at the beginning of this.
So I had a thought while you were talking, as perhaps if you need it. We're recording, so that I don't know whether this is on listeners. As perhaps the only non-academic here,
a thought that has been circulating in my mind ever since you suggested coming to this is it's a question really. Has the fact that being a doctor has shifted over the centuries, not recently, from being a discipline which required tremendous intellectual capacities and was connected to being a learned person, to being a profession where people can earn a huge salary.
Obstetric science created its other by delineating the practitioner of a different praxis as obsolete, inefficient, harmful, and pitted against this backward marginalized other, itself emerged as the scientific hegemonic norm for understanding pregnancy and childbirth. As a society, we gradually henceforth began to reorient our understanding of pregnancy in terms of trimesters and labor in terms of stages, and accepted that an institutional delivery is the only desired mode of undergoing childbirth. The dye, a reminder of a non-obstetric way of life and thus a counter-modern position, was to be erased at best or co-opted at worst, and traditional methods had to be replaced by obstetrics. Only that would translate as modernity and progress. This is the final section. This historical narrative was important because of the deep ways in which this experience impinge upon and impact us by shaping the ways we have come to imagine childbirth and maternity care in the contemporary. The fifth United Nations Millennium Development Goal was to reduce maternal mortality ratio by 3/4 by the year 2015. India, for its part, translated this to understand that the only way to reduce maternal mortality was by taking all births to the institution. Even as the institution remained in several places, especially across rural belts, a mockery of sorts. With the institutions in rural areas without anesthetists or even surgeons to tend to emergency obstetric complications, lack of blood banks, dearth of equipment, and an absence of infrastructural resources to ensure safe and quick referrals, an institutional delivery can often end up doing more damage to maternal health than not. For instance, while emergency obstetric care is often not available in these setups, routine episiotomies are done, and I met women who have complications because of the poorly put stitches or even ruptured stitches, which could then be not treated at the same clinic. The state, post-colonial and teleological, and invested in the idea that the modern epistemology is the only legitimate imagination, set to train its existing cadre of TBAs to TBAs, where T changed from traditional to trained. The fascinating paradoxes of the state-sponsored dye training programs that dotted several states of India, particularly between the 1950s and 70s, can take up a different presentation, but it should suffice here to say that till date, traditional birth attendants continue to function, while the state both continues to depend on their services, albeit in suppressed, surreptitious ways, and also keeps trying to distance itself from this retrograde reality by incentivizing institutional deliveries. During my field work at a few suburban public maternity wards, I spoke with women who were unhappy at the way the hospital and the doctors were treating them, at the experience of the institution, and recounted of warm memories of dye-attended births of their previous children or other women whose childbirths they had attended as relatives or neighbors. I also spoke with women who were relieved that they were delivering at an institution, because in case things went wrong, there were doctors, ICUs, blood banks to back things up, unlike in the village where everything was left to the sole dye. A woman told me that it had been her dream to give birth at a big hospital, and the fact that her husband, after a year of an arranged marriage, had indeed got her to the hospital, though it was far away from their village, and had not insisted that she give birth at home with help from the local dye, was now proof to her that he had come to love her. So this was an arranged marriage, and this mattered to her. That he loves me, he listened to me. He's losing his daily wages because he's with her, sitting and running the errands at public hospitals, but I know now he loves me. One other woman whose newborn was critical and was on the NICU ventilator shared with me how fortunate she was to have been able to come to the institution where, even if, God forbid, her child died, she would know that everything possible had been done to save him. That would not have been possible had she given birth at home, and I quote her, "He would have not lived even these 3 days." Yet another woman shared her ordeal of how the institution was lonely, dismissive, and how no one ever bothered to talk to her or ask her how her pain was. She was recovering from a C-section and her child was in the NICU as well. She said that she had birthed in the village. Had she birthed in the village, the child would have died probably, but she would not have had to undergo this additional pain and humiliation. The institution has become inclusive to a large extent, but inclusion comes at a cost. The birthing reality of women who still move between the traditional and the institutional is far more complex than is captured by the linear and teleological imagination of the state. The colonial experience informed the way the state perceives non-modern ways of attending to childbirth and shaped its relation with the community embodying this praxis, which is the dye. And yet the state needs to depend on them, even as it tries to obliterate them. The imagination of the institution has been monodirectional and linear. It is a far more close and critical understanding of the reality of lived experiences that would be able to nuance as well as humanize the space of the institution and be more sensitized to experiences of childbirth in India.
Good afternoon. Before I start, thank you, Rishi, for having me here. So today my presentation is actually a film which I'll play for you shortly within a few minutes. So I'll just give you a little bit of the background and context to it. I'm looking at my watch just to make sure that I stick to time. So my background is that I work as a psychiatrist at St. John's Medical College, Bangalore. And about 8 or 9 years ago in our busy outpatient clinic, to cut a long story short, and for confidentiality reasons I can't go into all the details, we had a young patient who was the second last patient of the day. So it was the end of a very hectic OPD. And my postgraduate student presented this young lady the history. And one of the things she mentioned is that in parallel to the psychiatric illness which brought her to hospital, this young girl reported that one of the doctors, psychiatrists who had treated her, not in St. John's but outside in a different hospital, had sexually abused her several times. And I was shocked when I heard that. I didn't believe it. And when I told my postgraduate student this patient is mentally ill, I'm sure she's misunderstood what has happened. And luckily for me, my student was very firm in that, no, it's not a delusion. This is the reason why I believe it happened. And she turned out to be absolutely right. And later when I read up a little bit more about it, I realized that the patient's experience was unfortunately textbook. I mean, we didn't have much literature in India, but abroad quite a lot was written about it. Her experience was absolutely textbook. The behavior of the doctor who abused her was also textbook. And unfortunately, my behavior was also textbook in that I didn't believe the patient. So from this, we decided we run an undergraduate a medical ethics course for students in St. John's from the beginning, much before MCI had mandated it. So I spoke to the head of department that time that can we have a session on boundaries in the doctor-patient relationship with the medical undergraduates, because I felt unless they're sensitized, I don't want them to go through the same thing which I did, was failing to recognize when someone told me what was happening. So we started doing that. In fact, the first year, as I often say, we have 60 students in St. John's, 30 girls and 30 boys. Of 30 girls, 15 are religious sisters. So the first year we had this session and I called it Boundaries in the Doctor-Patient Relationship. I had all the girls attend and one boy. So next year I called it Sexual and Non-Sexual Boundaries in the Doctor-Patient Relationship, and it was houseful. And so subsequently, this film, we made that a few years later. It's 18 minutes, so designed for us to be able to play it in the class, and we've been using it over the last few years. And then we have one session the previous week on what we call non-sexual boundaries in the doctor-patient relationship, and we set up the stage for sexual boundaries in the doctor-patient relationship, and then we play this. It is an 18-minute video, and the actual film runs for about 15 minutes. The remaining 2 minutes is 2.5 minutes is the credits, and I request you all to sit through this because a lot of people who contributed to this film, none of them took any payment other than the makeup artist, so that is the only payback I can give them.
It's just, and then what I'm going to talk about is some amount of loud thinking, just trying to investigate an area which I think both the medical professionals and the ethicists, and I'm sure at the same time most of the authors and writers have not explored to the extent that should be done. And that is looking at the publishers, the journal publishers and book publishers. A couple of personal experiences triggered off this, and then a couple of other things happening in the international arena try to consolidate this idea, and this is trying to bounce off with you people. One was, we published a journal called Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, and we had a massive controversy in 2018, sometimes in the middle of around May, when we published a paper written by a person called Lars Anderson. And it was a paper which was analyzing the increasing carcinoma cervix among women in Sweden who were given the preventive vaccine, HPV vaccine. Now this was a kind of a very revealing kind of a paper. Paper was based on publicly available demographic data of Sweden. So you can download and you can analyze them. Doing simple statistical analysis, try to show that somehow or other, the women who were already vaccinated, they were showing higher incidence of cervical cancer. So instead of preventing, it seems that in certain cases, what was the reason, what was the pathogenesis and all, no idea. This was just simple, a finding. Now that, once we published it, it really created a storm. We didn't know that, we were dabbling into something. And perhaps they thought, well, who are the Indians publishing something on Sweden? That may be the first thing. The second could be, anything in vaccine, in medical world, is a holy cow, taboo. You cannot talk about beef in India, same way you cannot talk about vaccine within the medical profession. You criticize it, you are in trouble. Simply because, well, you may be part of the anti-vaxxer movement and you are challenging something which is well-established understanding of the medical profession, that vaccine prevents disease, it never causes more harm. So that is a thing. The third was perhaps, what we found was that was a time when the vaccine producers were trying to expand the reach of, their vaccine. So earlier it was given only to the girls in the age group of 10 to 14. Now they wanted to, get a license to give it from the age of 10 to 40. Not only for the girls but also men, because, HPV infection can be amongst the men too. And they ultimately achieved it around July, August. But this in May when we published, we had no idea that something like this was going to happen. So, at the same time, we found that, the author had given an affiliation, which was that of Karolinska Institution. The Karolinska Institution wrote to us saying that this fellow doesn't belong to us. Okay, so I wrote to author saying that, well, what is the problem, Author said, yeah, I don't belong there. That affiliation that I given is wrong. So he was cheating us. But he said, it's not that I never worked there. I worked there for a long time as a professor. Okay, this is a personal conversation. But he said, the name that I given is also not the real name. That was another thing. This was a pseudonym that I've used. I said, why did you do it? He said, anybody who writes against vaccine gets lynched, so I don't want to give my name. I said, that's not a sufficient reason, Then I said, we have to retract this paper because this is what you have cheated us. He said, no, don't retract. It's a very important paper. Actually, the review went on for 4 months, with experts. And a lot of to and fro, and after it was, published. So we had also invested a lot of energy in refining, getting the paper refined and asked right questions and all. He said, no. Then he gave me, and I'm not telling you the exact gender of the author. I'm just saying because Lars Anderson is normally for men, so I'm just using it man. But I discovered that he was in a position, working in a position, where he just cannot reveal himself. Okay, if he does it, he will be sacked from the job. Okay, and then there will be a lot of other consequences for them. So this is an area of deception I'm sure pseudonyms are used in literary world quite a lot. And you will find that some of the well-known 19th century writers, they had used it and then later on revealed themselves. But in scientific world, this is considered to be a massive misconduct. If so facto, you have to immediately retract the paper. We did not retract. We first published a correction saying that this fellow does not exist. This is there. It's a pseudonym, and we are going to keep because we think that there is no scientifically paper stands on its own feet, and anybody who wants to, challenge it can do challenge by using the same data which are available in the public domain, and we are ready to publish anything now. That even led to more attack on us, and ultimately after 2 or 3 weeks, we withdrew it.
So I know somebody was asking me today at lunch, like what got me into this, because I'm clearly a person who's outside the system of healthcare. And so I had a personal incident. A very close loved one was really, really sick. And when they were in the hospital and they were being treated, it was it was like a near-death sort of experience that we had. And just like how Rishi was mentioning, that while we have advanced so much medically and from a technical standpoint, we all felt very burdened as caregivers, and we had to provide so much of the social and emotional support that it really inspired me to try and seek that in the healthcare system, but more from a design and innovation space, so that I could focus mostly on those sorts of needs. So my calling and passion sort of went into designing for dignity, mostly in the healthcare systems in Toronto and back here in India. I completed my thesis project for my master's, which was called The Role of Dignity in Death and Dying. And that has sort of resulted in artistic and practical uses in my work. And so my current work at Roundglass is a continuation of it. And I, just like how Rishi was mentioning in the beginning, I think it's extremely important for me that I function at a multidisciplinary level, because then I get to work with many kinds of people, because I feel like for complex systems, you can't design for it alone. And I'm really grateful that all of you are here, because I think that it enriches the conversation so much more. So to start with, I always start with this quote. This is by one of my favorite people in the space of palliative care. His name is Dr. B.J. Miller. He's a hospice and palliative care specialist who treats hospitalized patients with terminal and life-altering illnesses in the US. He did his undergrad in art history and he followed that up by studying medicine. He's the former director of the Zen Hospice Project. And when he was 19, he had a very severe accident that made him spend a lot of time in palliative care. He lost 3 of his limbs due to an accident, and while spending time in the ward, realized that he had to redesign the way he looked at life because of this near-death experience. And I love the fact that he says that if we sort of love some of these moments about redesigning our lives so ferociously, then maybe we can also learn to live well, not in spite of death, but because of it. And he talks about how just like, and I think that you can replace death with anything, whether it's illness or whether it is about designing for healthcare. But he says, let death be what takes us, not the lack of imagination. So when I speak about what it means for me to be multidisciplinary, this is the kind of framework I use to understand death literacy. I feel that it has 3 areas for me, which are very important. One is really looking at the service of death literacy. What does it mean to create an experience of death and death literacy? And that means, the packaging of it and how the packaging of that gets used and consumed by people, or even looking at the transaction of those various ideas. So it's the idea of really taking something that is taboo and making it tangible and consumable. The aesthetics for me is really about the framing of it. How do you create an environment of safety when talking about death and dying? And of course, then looking at the function itself of death literacy, that how do you create literacy on a subject that is so taboo? But I will unpack this through a couple of examples, and we can come back to this framework later. So I wanted to talk about some examples of places in healthcare where there has been a multidisciplinary approach to designing for people or a system at large. So I've taken 3 examples, some of you might be familiar with it. So there was the principal designer of GE Healthcare, Doug Dietz, had designed this very, very beautiful MRI machine. And when he went to examine it the day it was being installed and being used, he was very excited, and he ran across the hospital room just to understand how it was going to be used. He realized that there was a child there with her parents who was crying and crying because she was absolutely petrified to get into this machine and stay still and have to just interact with something that she didn't really know, and which was obviously much larger than her. So based on that, I think he was inspired to understand how to make this more comfortable for people who might actually be scared of this machine. And he slowly realized that a lot of children are probably scared to be in the hospitals and to also have such huge medical equipment around them. So he was inspired by looking at the IDEO process, which is the HCD process, which is the human-centered design approach, where you put the user in the center of what you design. So in this case, when you look at his understanding of design, for him, functionality was the most important thing. But what was missing was who he was serving. So he spent a lot of time working with various stakeholders who were relating to that product and who would be using that product. So whether it was nurses or doctors and even children. And they devised these beautiful MRI machines, like which became fantasy lands. So one was looking at a pirate adventure, which is a visual transformation of the equipment, where patients are in a dock. And then there's a whole story around it where there's a shipwreck and there are some sandcastles in the corner. And then the children then work around the puzzles and the various sort of mysteries attached to it while they're being scanned. Another one was also looking at a coral city adventure, which gives children an underwater-like experience. So it has a disco ball and it has bubbles and various things that have made it aesthetically appealing on one hand. It also serves its function, but it also serves the people that would probably not get into it. And a lot of people said that it was easier to get into a machine like this after someone created a valuable experience for them around them. The second one I wanted to speak about is a nursing home with a purpose. So this has actually been featured in Dr. Atul Gavande's book, Being Mortal. So Nursing with a Purpose was really by a gentleman called Dr. Bill Thomas, who was the director of, I think it was the Chase Memorial Nursing Home, where when he became the medical director, he believed that a lot of people were lonely, and he felt that the main aim for him to make a difference here was to attack what he termed the 3 plagues of nursing homes' existence, which is boredom, loneliness, and helplessness. He believed that a good life was one of maximum independence, but that was precisely what the people in the home were denied. He got to know the nursing home residents. They had been teachers, shopkeepers, housewives, and factory workers, just like people he had known growing up. He was sure something better must be possible for them. So acting on a little more than just instinct, he decided to try to put some life into the nursing home, and like the way anyone would in their own home. So he introduced plants, animals, and children into the life of the residents. And what started happening is that people who were lonely, or people who were visited less, or people who were on very heavy medication started responding really well to the animals and the pets and the plants, and suddenly they had a purpose. So people would get up and say, I need to water my plant, or I need to take care of the food for an animal. And this sort of started generating a sense of purpose and meaning, and people who had been lonely and had been isolated for so many months on end actually started interacting with a lot of people there. And their way of measuring this was to see that the amount of medication people needed sort of came down. But again, this was redesigning a system for well-being by trying to look at systems outside of a regular healthcare system. And of course, the third one I'm guessing we're all very familiar with is Narayana Rudralaya, where Dr. Devi Shetty has used, is trying to make healthcare affordable and therefore creating well-being for an entire society. So when his idea was to focus on bringing down the cost of many surgeries, and he's a heart surgeon, and so he looks at even creating surgery models where surgeries are done under $800, which is pretty much unheard of in many private hospitals. So over here as well, in order to keep the costs down, Dr. Devi Shetty has looked at the Henry Ford model of an assembly line, and he's also looked at what it means to buy equipment in bulk. And so he's looked at companies like Walmart, he's looked at different kinds of assembly production lines to make his system more efficient, and of course make it reasonable for those who can't afford healthcare. And his aim is really to make societies healthy, which means he's looking at different industries as a benchmark to create that kind of well-being.
When I received Dr. Rishi's email, that was around the time when the new curriculum was sort of released, and I thought, oh, I want to write about this. So my little talk here is called The Disappearing Act, Humanities in Medical Curriculum in India. Okay. So I live and work in a campus town that has grown around the first private medical college in this country, the Kasturba Medical College. It was set up in Manipal in 1953. An engineering college was added 4 years later, and after that a constellation of other institutions followed, mostly relating to the health sciences. It took 57 years after the founding of the medical college for a humanities center to drop anchor in Manipal. At the risk of sounding dramatic, I can say that I often find myself speaking into that 6 decades of void in what is one of the most important medical hubs of our region and our country even. So patients, nurses, doctors, medical students, medical researchers, pharmacists, caregivers and technicians, medical auxiliary staff. Our town has a very high density of all these people within a 2-kilometer radius. My training has been in literary studies, and I have taught semester-long courses in medical humanities to master's students of English since 2014. So since 2014, these 4 years have also overlapped with the 4 years, as you just read in your introduction, with the 4 years that I served on the Institutional Ethics Committee of our hospital. And this is an experience that has deeply shaped how I feel about the field, but that is a topic for another time. More relevant to today is that 3 months ago, I started to teach a module in medical humanities to first year MBBS students. This was done as part of the community medicine course. It's a first year course. It's titled Humanities and Community Medicine. That this is in the curriculum, this is the title. And the MCI has allotted 60 hours to this course. So again, just to clarify, the curriculum I'm talking about is the one that's in practice, the one that was formulated in 1997 and has been in place for 21 years. The only other information given by MCI in this document and which follows the title is as follows, so I'm just reading it, including introduction to the subjects of demography, health economics, medical sociology, hospital management, behavioral sciences, inclusive of psychology. So what does the MCI articulate as a desired skill for students from this community medicine course? So 2 are mentioned. The first is to understand the practice of medicine in community settings, and the second one, again I quote, the art of communication with patients including history taking and medico-social work. This is the only mention of humanities and its desired outcome. While the vagueness might have been a lacune for several educators, I have also written on this, the open formulation also gave some sense of humanities as a discipline that could be, as it should be, accommodated from an interdisciplinary perspective. In addition, it kept a window open for a whole cluster of disciplines, philosophy, sociology, literature, history, that an instructor could include and interpret according to her expertise. From my readings, interactions and observations, I can claim with some confidence that this gesture to the humanities in medical pedagogy in India has broadly spanned in 3 directions. Firstly, and most obviously, the teaching and practice of communication skills. Secondly, as introduction to applied bioethics. And thirdly, as creative expression or creative pedagogy, the emphasis there being on expressive oneself to generate empathy. So in short, communication, bioethics and expressivist. So what had been attempted in medical pedagogy in many other countries, such as of course the US, that I could not locate in the conversations with colleagues around me here in India, was a sustained engagement with medical humanities as methodology, which we were discussing earlier. I will say a little bit more about what I mean by methodology, but for now I want to stay with the curriculum that has been laid down by regulatory bodies. As we know, in November 2018, barely 3 months ago, the MCI revised the MBBS curriculum for the first time since 97. This completely revamped curriculum will come into force for students starting their medical education from August 2019. As I went through the curriculum, the most striking thing for me, because obviously that's what I was looking for, is the disappearance of one word, humanities. In a document that runs to 3 volumes of 690 pages plus another 90 pages of a document devoted entirely to ATCOM, which I will explain shortly for those who may not know, that is 780 pages in all, not once is humanities or social sciences mentioned. One also cannot help noting that the panel of experts for the new curriculum does not include any humanist, ethicist or communication expert, even as each document repeatedly foregrounds 5 goals in medical pedagogy, like we were discussing this morning with Dr. Satyendra. It is to shape an individual who, in a nutshell, so there are 5 things, is a compassionate care provider, a member of healthcare teams and systems, is an effective communicator, a lifelong learner and an ethical professional. 5 things. My intention today, so just to clarify, is not to lament or foreground a semantic loss, but to see these gaps and changing curricular systems as an opportunity for us to discuss what was always missing or deliberately skewed in formulations of medical humanities in any Indian medical curriculum. So this new curriculum, which has just been announced, is called the competency-based undergraduate curriculum. It's an elaborate revision of the previous version. It is laid out in a grid that opens up vertical and horizontal integration of subjects across various specializations, with more emphasis on practical knowledge and a longitudinal program titled ATCOM. So ATCOM is an acronym for for Attitude, Ethics and Communication. So the ATCOM program is to be taught across 4 professional years in 5 modules for a grand total of 34 hours. Dr. Jayashree Mehta, who is the president of MCI, writes in her foreword to the ATCOM module, she writes, I quote her, "The cognitive domain, which hitherto was not appropriately incorporated and structured in the curriculum, has been specifically dispensed of by providing a definitive model for the same titled ATCOM." While we might not be amiss to assume here that the missing humanities has turned into ATCOM, we hesitate. Our attention is invariably drawn to the phrase cognitive domain that Dr. Mehta has foregrounded for us. She puts the 2 words in quotes, a grammatical choice that also puzzles us. Cognitive has been conventionally distinguished from the affective or emotions, and the cognitive or thoughts as that which decides how one acts on those thoughts or emotions. In other words, action and volition, will, agency. Medical humanities has been making a case for several decades now to not only work across disciplinary silos, as several of you, my colleagues, have been pointing out since morning, but to see the interplay of the cognitive, the affective and the cognitive not as separate domains, but as dependent on each other. So then clearly ATCOM is not humanities. A closer look at the ATCOM model reveals instrumental approach to training in prefabricated topics. So here are some examples. So these are the names of the topics. What does it mean to be a doctor? The foundations of communication, case ethics in bioethics, dealing with death, ethics and the doctor-industry relationship, medical negligence, and so on. The pedagogy outlined beneath each topic is primarily about proposing case studies for discussion and inviting students to somewhat settle back into the problem-solving model that has somehow become the hallmark of science education from our school curriculum itself. So this morphing or missing humanities and its perspectives, depending on where you stand on this, is hardly surprising because culturally in India we have always devalued humanities and valorized sciences. I would not be so presumptuous as to tell a chemical engineer how to do her work, but a humanities teacher often receives plenty of unsolicited advice on how to teach and has to be on the defensive about what research means in the discipline. So very often this has happened to me at every level, students onwards, colleagues in the medical who come up to me and say, what is the one thing that we are supposed to get from this? And I always find myself explaining that humanities doesn't work like that human societies are messy and untidy and there's no one thing to talk about. So I think that's what I was referring to. In fact, we often discuss in my literature class that while medical education has actively, for a while, had to make a case for including humanities in its curriculum, for literature, its close association with medicine has always been a given. The recesses of the mind, the body in health, physicians and medicine, sickness and recovery, hospitalization and disability, sex and sexuality, death and decay. All this is a part of our work too, albeit in a different manner. For instance, and it's just by coincidence we were discussing this during lunch, is a popular text like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So the story of the knowledge-hungry scientist who commits the blasphemy of creating life, we know that this story, for instance, if several queer studies scholars have revisited this novel to look at it and study its homoerotic undertones, for instance. Similarly, a medical humanities reading would unearth for us several key moral, social, scientific debates, some of the early 19th century and some relevant to us now. And also listening to Raki earlier, I was also reminded of a very famous one-act play by Rashid Jahan in the 1913s. It came in the Angare, the band collection. It was called Parde Ke Piche, and it is set in a zanana. So these two women were talking about sexuality and gynecology and their difficulties with childbirth, and a husband who will not let them breastfeed because he wants to have sex with them all the time. All of this is discussed within the Zenana setting. So not just the theme, but just the setting and how the play opens. Every time the door opens, it's not the outside, but it's another part of the house. So this would be a little bit, a little demonstration in some ways of what I said when I said that medical humanities to me is more than anything else a methodology, right? Training in the discipline would include reflection on how to read, listen, encounter narrative, its subtext, its context, how to think critically, laterally, outside, through, around the problem solving model, and how to incorporate scholarship from the humanities in our understanding of key debates on health. To reiterate, this critical encounter between medical science and humanities is in fact a way of looking at the world, a mode of reading. Not merely about content but process, the use of various tools from allied disciplines sort of incorporated to collectively, fruitfully engage with many preoccupations of human society. Right? And so it doesn't matter, like I think that was, I actually was thinking, maybe my mind is still with the question that Dr. Satyendra asked, which is, which you said, this question about aesthetics and function, but between that is what are the groups that don't get addressed, right? So not just design, but design that is inclusive. And then similarly, how would one talk about that in ethical terminology, socio-cultural, theological, legal, right? So how do we include all these narratives? So even like a debate, like one of you mentioned, say euthanasia, even if he talks, how can we possibly have this conversation without all these other factors on the table? I must say that I personally struggle to see how an ADCOM model taught in continuum with other subjects within the parameters of the same medical discipline would be able to bring in new dimensions of understanding or new modes of thinking. The other challenge for ADCOM is the emphasis remains on capsules of information, on product, not approach, not process, not method. When we have a hybrid discipline like medical humanities, two disciplines conjoined, so I always call it the conjoined, and I think it's critical to acknowledge how the field has been shaped by a belief in the vitality of interdisciplinary and non-hierarchical conversations across disciplinary boundaries. Now this would be sustainable only if both components of the field, medical and humanities, are given equal validity and weightage. While I completely understand and accept that for medical education, humanities has to work within the parameters of medicine. I understand that. But we need more clarity on how to locate and explore subjects from the humanities within an existing regulatory curricular system. How do we do it? So the recent guidelines and revisions, I'm afraid, are not just missing a word, but missing out the possibilities of a genuine engagement with the ethos of medical humanities. And I do want us to take stock here of the enormity of this omission. When I began exploring medical humanities with literature students at Manipal, one of the most rewarding pedagogical experiences of my teaching life, I was always aware that I was canvassing to the choir, even at times, even when it was not the most easiest choir, right? I felt restless to take my ideas into a medical classroom. To me, it was a logical and parallel progression. So when my literature class read the transgender activist A. Revati's memoir, The Truth About Me, A Hijra Life, I wanted to read it with medical students to discuss the complex challenges of body and pain and change. It must be serendipity because just before the 2018 guidelines, the one with the grid, was released, I met the head of community medicine in our medical college and volunteered to teach a module as part of their course for first year students. So my thanks to Dr. Suman Nair for being open to this. So nobody asked me to do this, I get nothing out of it. I said, because I thought I can't go on being critical about something if I haven't done something about it, right? I can't go on saying, the curricular is not doing this if I don't do it. So I was like, you don't have to pay me nothing, I'm doing extra work on top of what I'm already doing, I'll do it. So she said yes, and we began. So we began in 2018. Okay, so first there were logistical issues to address. I would have liked small discussion-based classrooms, student-initiated projects. More importantly, I would have liked the model to be elective. I wanted to talk to students who are curious, interested to learn about the workings of other discipline. But as things stood, community medicine was a compulsory attendance requiring course for all 250 students, divided into 2 batches of 125 students each. It would be almost impossible for me to thoughtfully respond to their work or even grade assignments, qualitative assignments without teaching assistants. I had none. So I decided to design 10 lectures with recommended readings, and at the end of the course offer a certificate course, or give an option that after this, those of you who are interested in having a certificate course or even for credits on your transcript, you apply to me with a statement of purpose, and a very small group of us would then meet and then maybe have a more intensive engagement. If I'm able to organize this certificate course in the coming months, so right now I'm in the middle of this, I'm talking from the battlefield. Right? If I'm ever able to organize this in the coming months, a prospect of some uncertainty at this point, then I would require the participants to work on an empirical project with a multidisciplinary approach, as my literature students have done. I have written about this exercise by my students in some detail for the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics a few months ago, and so if you're interested, it's out there, the assignment. Here also, of course, I don't mind telling you that my pedagogy is very interesting. How medical humanities, I was saying, happens to me. So the very first time I taught medical humanities to literature students, it was just one of the strange coincidences, because the 16 weeks of the course coincided with the 16 weeks from when my father was diagnosed with liver cirrhosis from alcoholism to when he died. So it was medical humanities was happening to me. I was in and out of hospitals dealing with, death and just complex, as you can imagine, family dynamics, even as I was sitting in a class and reading these texts. And I was preparing for the class, sometimes sitting in the hospital. So I think it kind of shaped how I felt this should be taught or how this should be studied. So okay, back to my classroom with the first year medical students. Each of these lectures for me has been very much like wearing a patchwork quilt, a thought pattern that I share through select ideas and themes. So my effort in the past couple of months of teaching in these very large lecture hall space, very different from my humanities classroom. It's a very small, much smaller classroom. I can't do the mic and the stage, but that's what it is. I do the mic and the stage. Has been to think about how not just to make the content relevant to my audience, but to demonstrate the application of critical thinking. So in some ways to critically think in real times, and I put something up so that I can showcase certain relevant scholarship. So I bring certain scholars, certain ideas into the classroom, and then different ways of asking the same question. So apart from the introductory session, these lectures have been designed to touch upon different approaches from the humanities, on language and literature, on history and visual arts, on philosophy and ethics, on politics and law, on gender and sexuality, on mental health, on the art of writing. All of this within the context and practice of research in medicine. So I know I saw Dr. Jesani's eyebrow go up. So I know I'm at risk of being entirely trying to do too much, being superficial, moving in many directions in a short period of time. But the design of the classroom, both physical and conceptual, which includes the biometric attendance, that was also new to me, requires me to cast my net wide and hope for the best. At any rate, the idea I thought was to give a glimpse, because I just had that much time, to give a glimpse to medical students about the range of intersectional points that humanities has with medicine. Since we are now in a group of like-minded colleagues grappling with the same dilemma, I don't mind confessing and confiding in you that I have not felt comfortable with the experience, and I'm not sure I will ever volunteer to do this model again, even if the regulatory authorities were to bring back humanities into the curriculum. It has been one of the steepest and, dare I say, painful learning curves of my teaching career. However, it has also given me extraordinary insights that I know only hard labor gives. So I do not take it lightly. So if I were to be asked for recommendations based on my insight and my observations, so this is what I feel at this point. So remember, I'm halfway in the course. I'll be done second week of March. Yes. So these are my thoughts. Firstly, the word medical humanities, I really think, I'm not just being fussy, but I think there's something to be said for hanging on to certain words, because especially the word is a discipline, right? I feel it should come back in the curriculum as an independent course with every effort made to accommodate the rich complexities of the discipline. ATCOM is not medical humanities. I find myself saying this more often than I'd like to. Secondly, I think humanities scholars must be invited to teach these courses. It's really important. So in that, I agree with all of you that we should, at least some models. It's important to do, when we do medical humanities, we should get the humanities scholars involved. Thirdly, I think, and this is maybe where we'll disagree, Rishi, because when you started the day, you said you feel that, we should just, and I did, until I taught this course, I was with you. I used to say that it should not be an elective, everybody should do this course. I've changed my mind. The medical humanities course should be made entirely optional, a graded elective with credits. And simultaneously, the teaching of ATCOM needs more thought. As we all know, it is never entirely about what we teach, but how we teach and who teaches. I'm likely to say something controversial now, but I don't believe that ethical doctors are formed by attending 34 hours of ossified ATCOM modules. Many complex factors go into shaping an individual's worldview. I would rather have, and this I feel after teaching this module, I would rather have 10 people in my class who have the desire to make a difference, who will successfully transmit that difference, than 100 human beings who are somewhat apathetic somewhere in between there, deep in their video games on their phones, even as they walk to the doors of medical school. This is not being fatalistic, but this is accepting that students should be given choice. Forced learning, in my opinion, is no learning at all. And here, of course, I don't mind saying that. In fact, my very first introductory class, it's quite a revelatory moment for me, because I was saying, okay, this is what medical humanities is, full of josh and good hope, and this is what it is, this is what I do. And I said, why have I come to medical humanities? Why am I doing this? No one's asked me to do it, no one's paying me to do this. Why am I doing this twice a week, 2 different sections, 250 people staring at me? Why am I doing it? And so I said, I gave my reasons. I said how my life has somehow had these moments of medical humanities, and then I said, why are you here? And I said, why have you become doctor? Like, people choose medical school for various reasons. So I said, let's reflect on why did you choose medicine? And so when I said that, I followed it up by saying, so why are you here? Meaning to say, why did you choose to study medicine? And you will not believe this. In one voice, as a chorus, they all said, attendance. I swear, it was just in one voice. Why are you here? I meant, why are you become doctor? And they're like, attendance. I was like, okay, I know where we stand. Okay, so just this idea of I go to class to learn, vis-a-vis I go to class because my teacher makes me go to class and I have to do the biometric and Okay, so the fourth one, my fourth recommendation is, I think if we do get medical humanities back in a serious way, then we need to create more opportunities for medical students in these interdisciplinary forays of medical humanities. No point in just teaching the course. I think it has to be followed up with access to projects in terms of collaborations, institutional support, in terms of forums, further applications in praxis. So this is, I know that Dr. Satyendra has been organizing several of these forums. He invites students from different colleges who are interested in medical humanities. So that to me is one way to go. So I confess that I have a much more realistic sense now of what we are up against. The Indian admission system, let's face it, is based on an extremely competitive nationwide exam. We have naturalized the horrors of moving through nothing but multiple choice, information heavy test-based systems. There isn't the faintest breath of humanities in that assessment. So we have to accept that. Most entrants to medical schools have put in 4 years of rigorous study in this vein. 4 years is effectively a quarter of an 18-year-old's life, right? Instead of feeling responsible for such a narrow type of education, the medical student, and here I'm not being critical of the student, I'm thinking of the system, parents, educators, all of us, right? I think they benefited from enormous cultural and social validation. So it is not surprising then that the same pattern carries into the undergraduate and the postgraduate education. To question the system at all, I think, is quite Herculean, but perhaps if anyone can do it, I thought this forum is best positioned to do it. I admire all of your work, so I'm really grateful to you for listening and for the opportunity to be here and share my ideas. Thank you so much.
I found Dr. Prabhu's talk especially interesting because we are in a somewhat similar situation. except that we are a couple of years older than you in this field. But of course, nowhere near what St. John's and Satyendra and his group are. I think they are the role models for us, really. And we continue to learn from St. John's and from Satyendra's group. The medical college in which we are working is called the St. G.S. Medical College. It's affiliated to a hospital called the King Edward Memorial. GS stands for Gordandas Sundardas, who was the donor. The family of Gordandas Sundardas donated the college. College was set up in 1925, so a few years from now it will be 100 years old. It's a general medical college, undergraduate, postgraduate students, virtually all the clinical departments and all the allied basic science departments. This gentleman whose photograph you see on the left-hand bottom is Dr. Manu Kothari. He was professor of anatomy, head of the Department of Anatomy in the GS Medical College. Very much respected figure with broad vision and also considerable depth of knowledge. And when he died, his family expressed the wish that they would like something new to be set up in the GS Medical College in memory of Dr. Manu Kothari. And so in consultation with the administration of the hospital, an unofficial section on medical humanities was set up. It has no official standing. The medical college and the hospital are run by the Municipal Corporation of Greater Bombay. And the Municipal Corporation has no cognizance of this department. It doesn't even know that this department exists. And whosoever is working in this field is working on an honorary basis because they are interested in working. Now, this is why we felt that medical humanities were necessary in our college, and we feel in the other medical colleges in the city, certainly. And these are the reasons why we feel that this section or this division is extremely important. Incidentally, this program has nothing to do with the Medical Council of India regulations or requirements or whatever. Although we are told that once it becomes compulsory for the medical college to have a division of medical humanities, life will become easier for us. I'm not so sure whether it will become easier, but that's what we are told. Let me go one by one through these different points. As Dr. Prabhu pointed out, we have students coming into medical college, and the GS Medical College gets virtually the cream of the medical students of the city because it's got a good reputation. But these students have all been learning how to get 99 marks out of 100, or if possible 105 marks out of 100 if you add all the additional marks for sports and whatever you have. They have not been taught how to understand, how to question, how to reason. They only know how to gain marks, and that's their forte, that's their strong point. Then there are the other four, and we'll come to them one by one. This is what we notice when these medical students join medical college. They really do not bother to ask. Whatever the teacher tells them is gospel truth, and it is not to be challenged. There is no spirit of inquiry, nobody asks those questions. And they do not understand the concept of research. Even after they've graduated and they've become postgraduates, the maximum they will do is to repeat something which has been done elsewhere. So it's research, not genuine research. Innovation is foreign to their way of thinking. They accept whatever is there and they will utilize whatever is going on. And they don't seem to be bothered about cost to the patient or how something can be simplified or something can be made less expensive as far as patient care is concerned. Then their evaluation of patients, and these are the common experiences. Most times, medical students reflect what they see in their teachers. And what they see in their teachers is that the teachers are constantly in a hurry. They have no time for patients. So history taking is perfunctory, examination of the patient is cursory, and there's a tremendous amount of emphasis or attention paid to the findings of tests. So tests have virtually replaced history taking and clinical examination. And it's quite common for young residents, first year residents, to start writing down a whole list of tests without having come to a clinical diagnosis as to what is wrong with the patient. I mean, before they even make a clinical diagnosis, they already started writing down a whole series of tests, expecting that the tests will substitute for history taking and clinical examination, which is stupidity. It never happens that way, but that's what they believe. And they have no time to talk to the patient and the relatives. Even worse, they have no time to listen to what the patient or the relatives are saying. They have no time to answer questions, for instance. And as you can see at the end, as a consequence of all this, there is virtually no empathy. This is what also happens in the actual care of the patient. And the same kind of list goes down. They are unconcerned about the social strata from which the patients come. Since the KEM hospital has a large draining area, we have patients coming sometimes 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers. Many of these are very, very poor patients. They have had great difficulty just coming to the hospital. And now from a village, they are suddenly in this maddening city of Mumbai, where nobody cares for anybody else. And they are virtually short of funds, virtually no funds with them. And one would expect a medical student or a young resident to be concerned. How is this person going to be able to pay for the tests which I am writing down? But it doesn't seem to bother them. So there are all these kinds of problems which we find with them. When you talk to them about extracurricular interests, or when you observe them and try and see what they have as extracurricular interests, the predominant extracurricular interest is social media. And these stupid magic phones, smartphones as they call them, which make us stupid whilst they are smart, they seem to be the instrument of choice as far as students and residents are concerned. And this addiction has become a menace now. And in IMHANS in Bangalore, as you know, there is a separate department which caters to electronic addiction. There's a complete department which has been set up. So nasty is the problem. Libraries are foreign now to students and to residents. They much prefer looking at what they can access through their smartphones and through the electronic access that they get in the medical college to journals and to various publications. They don't look at printed books and printed journals anymore. I understand that very recently, the Postgraduate Institute in Chandigarh announced they're going to close down their library, and instead they're going to have a battery of computers where the students can sit and access whatever journals or books they want. They're going to close down their library. It's amazing, but that's how it is. So what goals did we set ourselves? We're a small group, a small team, and these are the goals that we set ourselves. I'm afraid we set a slightly wider goal than you set, because we did not want to restrict ourselves to the field of medicine. We wanted to go beyond the field of medicine and expand the horizons of these students and residents into fields which are not necessarily connected with medicine, but if they were to adopt those fields, they would enrich their own lives. So that was one of the goals. And this is what we listed as items that we would like to get these youngsters to think about, to discuss, and to participate in. And you will see that it includes almost everything that she has talked about and what others have talked about as far as the humanities are concerned. You will notice that the second line says, demonstrate ethical medical practices. The reason is that nobody cares what you say. They are much more responsive to what you do. You can give them seminars, lectures, talks, discussions, hours, days on end. But if after coming out of a seminar, if they see their teacher ill-treating a patient or fleecing a patient, that is what they're going to follow, not what you've talked about over days or weeks. So that is why it's important for us to demonstrate rather than to talk about. And these are some of the activities that we've been carrying on for the last 3 years. And we've had all kinds of interesting individuals, and you will see there humanities in St. John's Institute by Dr. Mario Vaz as one of the very important and very interesting talks that we had. Because Mario has a vast amount of experience in this area, along with his team. They've been building up a very impressive series of programs which involve residents, students, and everything. So this is what we've tried to do. We've also, it's very interesting, we had this panel discussion on multiple choice questions in examinations. Multiple choice questions have proved to be a double-edged weapon. Whilst they are very quick to execute, very easy to execute, all that you have to do is just go on tick marking, they have deprived our students and our residents of the capability of description. They cannot describe now. They can only think in terms of simple statements, yes, no, maybe. They can't describe. They've lost this ability now. And I think that's a shame. And on the left, you see a program called Ascension. This has been important for us because what we have done is, this is a program which is completely designed and executed by medical students and residents. The staff of the Humanities Division has nothing to do with this program. It is the students who designed the entire program and executed. Now, up to about 4 or 5 years ago, the students' program used to be song and dance and drama. For the last 3 years, they have one day which is devoted to academic discussions. And that is where they seek guidance from Dr. Lopa Mehta and other teachers who are part of this Humanities Division. And so, guided by these teachers, it features talks which are pertaining to the humanities. And Dr. Satyendra has delivered one such talk under the aegis of this program. And you can see some of the people who have talked at some of these programs. And another very interesting area in which this division has embarked is to seek very, very senior retired teachers and other staff members and interview them on videotape so that we have a recording of their life and work as narrated by them on videotape. And we are hoping to build a kind of library which can be accessed by students at any time, now or 10 years from now or even 50 years from now. And it will give them a glimpse of the men who made GS Medical College, their times, their work, and the fruits that the students are now enjoying as a consequence. So these are the, sorry, I think I've turned this off. Okay. So this, we've been trying to analyze amongst ourselves what are the problems that we encounter and are there any solutions that we can find. There are some problems for which we have no solutions. But these are the problems for which we have some solutions. One important problem is, since this is an unofficial program, we have no slots allotted to us. There is no time which has been allotted in the curriculum for such activities. So we have to beg and borrow. So we have to talk to the anatomy professor, the physiology professor, the pathology professor, the pharmacology professor, and find some time when they can give us a lecture theatre for 1 hour or 1.5 hours or 2 hours. Sometimes we get those slots, sometimes we get them irregularly, and sometimes we don't get those slots. So depending on what slots we get, we try and fit these. Since this is irregular, we have also tried to use functions which are organized by students. We have tried to use weekends and holidays, but that's very difficult because that's the time when the students want to go off also. I mean, they have a horrifying curriculum. Their schedule is absolutely disastrous. And in addition to the official schedule in the medical college, so many of them go for tuitions. So the tuitions take even more of their time, and they have hardly any time for themselves to relax. So it's difficult. Sustaining interest in programs. There are some programs where the hall is completely packed. There are some programs where, in addition to the speaker and the members of the humanities division, there may be hardly 8 or 10 students and residents. And it's somewhat demoralizing for us, and it's demoralizing for the person who's speaking, because he's come a long distance to address these students and residents. So that's a big problem. And we've tried to get around that by making the students select, hoping that since they have selected the topic and they have selected the speaker, they will come. But it doesn't always work that way. These are the dreams that we have. We're not sure whether any of these dreams will ever materialize, or if they materialize, when they will materialize. But these are the dreams that we have. We dream that one day students and residents will develop a thirst for the humanities. They will want. At the moment, we are shoving humanities down their throats, so to say. We would like it if they were to ask for the humanities. And we want a sustained and productive Department of Humanities with its own permanent staff. This again seems to be at the moment a distant dream. Notwithstanding the fact that students don't look at books, we still wish to create a library of books on the humanities. We've already started in a small way. We have 2 cupboards of books on the history of medicine, literature, somewhat pertaining directly or indirectly to medicine, ethics. We have a few books which we have collected. But we hope to collect photographs, recordings, films which pertain to these topics. We hope that the movement will gather a momentum such that the students and the staff will produce a stream of books, essays, works of art on their own, and that this will be a stream which will rapidly gain in strength and in speed. And finally, we hope that all these individuals who are working or will work in the field of humanities will get renown for their own work that they are doing in the field. Most of all, and this is something which we put up in many of the talks which are presented to students, we put before them this ideal of who is a professional and what is expected of that professional. And we hope that at the end of the day, when this program comes to fruition, almost all our residents and all our medical students will aspire to become a professional along the lines that Judge Tuttle in America laid down long, long ago. Thank you.
I want to thank you for staying completely perfectly on 20 minutes. That was good.
Non-medical question. Thank you so much. It was really enlightening. I had a question. You mentioned, you were mentioning that students join medicine for the right reasons, and a large part of the job is to ensure that they stay on the right track. So I'm curious to know, are there any, are the students asked why they join medicine? And is that sort of question, or is that line of inquiry sustained through the time that they are in school? And I'm asking just from a curriculum perspective. Yeah.
We haven't carried out a survey, official or unofficial, but in our conversation with students, we get this kind of feedback. And the answers range from honesty, where they very clearly say, I'm here for the money, I will become rich quickly. But they don't put it in that blunt kind of term. That's what they imply, that we need money and this is what we want. That's why we've come to medical college. At the other extreme is we want to serve humanity. And that always leaves us with a bit of suspicion. Are they saying that because they're talking to us? And whether the answers would be different if they were talking to somebody else. But I think the in-between group is probably more interesting. They have come to medicine because they've had an experience of a very good doctor starting from childhood, or because they've seen some friend or relative being treated by a good doctor, and therefore they've chosen to enter a field where they can help others rather than exploit others. And I think that's more or less the middle segment. I think there are a number on this side and a number on that side, but a significant majority, I think, falls in this group.
My parents wanted me to.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we are talking about medical humanities, and I'll be sharing our little bit experiences with the medical humanities at University College of Medical Sciences. So Gayatri spoke about that what happens when you address a students of 125 strength. We have a strength of 150 medical students, and in Maulana Azad Medical College there is the same lecture theatre with 250 students over there. So what happens when a highly motivated, passionate teacher like Gayatri Prabhu goes and addresses the class? This is what happens. Small wonder that the commonest graffiti etched indelibly into the wooden desk in the lecture theatre and in the minds of students reads, in memory of those poor souls who died waiting for this lecture to finish. Because their goal is something else and our goal is something else. We are not in sync with our aspirations of medical students. There was a symposium in the National Conference for Health Professions Education, and they gave us this topic, changing needs of the new generation students. What do students expect from faculty? It is very nice to talk about humanities, but what is the response of the medical students? Are they really interested into this thing? So we did a survey among 7 medical students on a Google survey. It was an informal survey because we wanted to have their opinion on this topic. And the first question was, what do students expect from faculty when they join MBBS in the very first year from the preclinical faculty? The themes which emerged, the common answers were, number 1, learning, number 2, motivation, number 3, respect. We must treat them as adults, they are no children. And somebody asked whether you asked them the question, why do they want to become a doctor? The motivation thing was there. It is there in the very first year. But were your expectations met? When we asked them this question, the majority said no. Our expectations were not met. We asked similar question, what do students expect from faculty when they join clinical postings? And the answers were exactly the same which Dr. Pandya talked about. What they expect from the faculty member in the clinics is that they need mentoring. They need role modeling. The clinicians should tell them what worked and what did not work. They do not want sermon lectures. They want how they tackle those situations, critical situations, and how students can learn from their experiences, because everything else is available on internet. Last but not the least, empathy, which Sir also talked about. So these were their expectations from clinical faculty members. Were their expectations met? Again, majority said no. And this is the problem, because their goals are something else, our goals are something else. Medical humanities, as someone who is passionate about this thing, we do not expect that It is a very uncomfortable question that when we impose our expectations on the students that they all will become humane doctors, that will not happen. It is very difficult to set that goal. We are not setting that. What we want is that they get the joy in the learning. We do not want this situation to happen. This is made by a medical student. And this is what's happening in the lecture theatres right now. Someone who comes so motivated but becomes robotic after 4.5 years of medical schooling. There was this another paper which was published in Indian Journal of Medical Students, where we had this narrative medicine workshop with the medical students, again with the usual suspects. We taught them the Gibbs reflective cycle, and we asked them that you go around in your clinics, in your classes, everywhere, and come back and write a reflective narrative about something which bothered you, anything positive or negative. So they came back, they wrote on the narratives, and we were hoping that they will talk about, because ours is a government medical hospital, we thought they will talk about the, the routine, the disparity within the health setup. We were in for a shock, because what they talked about was that the thing which were bothering them the most was teacher-student relationship. How a senior doctor is treating the senior resident in the OPD in front of the patients. How the SR is treating the students who are coming for the clinics in front of the patients. These were the things which were bothering them. So we found that there was a small group, and we started our medical humanities group, of course, on the very noble day, 1st April, because all fools, they give innovative things on April 1. So it has been 10 years, 10 long years of the journey. So we created this particular group in 2009. And our main goal was that we were observing that there is not a clinical thinking among the medical students. There is an unprofessional behavior which they are admitting. There is no proper communication. There is a lack of respect for diversity, and somehow they are not being empathetic enough. So that's how we set up our medical humanities group, with the hope that we gave this paradigm, ABCD paradigm, where we states that we need to have an integrated interdisciplinary medical humanities approach to teach medical students appropriate analytical attitude, which is missing, ethical and professional behavior that is expected of them. They have to demonstrate that, effective communication, respect for diversity, and be empathetic. And our hope was that perhaps with the approaches from the medical humanities field, we have named a few, that they will use these attributes to develop the field of reflective capacity. They know how to reflect. Many of the students do not know how to reflect on various incidents which are happening. It will build on visual literacy. We often, when many of us who are trained in medical education, we go to conferences, they trained us how to teach, and we come up with the very first slide. At the end of the lecture, you should be able to do 1, 2, 3, 4. Nowadays, I have shifted my teaching style. I begin with a famous painting, and I try to ask them, what do you see? And each different student respond in a different way. We need to have this visual literacy, narrative competence, critical thinking, Amar was telling them. And personally, this is my personal experience, what I believe is that for me personally, medical humanities is a means of advocacy. It is a means of representing the marginalized, the vulnerable community. And that is why it is the duty of a medical student and a faculty member and a medical doctor to fulfill its social accountability. And that's why he needs to be an advocate of their rights. Nowadays, you do not have to give a didactic lectures, because then the same thing will happen again. What we need is multiple ingredients and not just spoonful of humanity. And that is why we started with the Confluence lecture series, where we invited non-medical people to share their experiences in the hospital to the medical students. We have a faculty supervised near-peer mentoring program. We have narrative medicine, theatre of the oppressed. Parvaz group is the one which has been very, very popular among the students, where they organize these meetings on poetries, and we talk about, of course, infinite abilities, the disability subgroup of medical humanities group. At the institutional level, I can say that what we have brought to the institution is that there is a culture of trust among students, because we started with this program of mentoring 11 years ago, 2008. At that time, we started it as a faculty supervised mentoring program, where there was a faculty mentors and students. But that program failed, because when we got the feedback at the end of the year, it was, not working, because, the head of the institution has volunteered to be a mentor. There are many anesthetists who volunteer to be a mentor, but they are busy in their hospitals, in their OTs, and there is no contact with the students. So what, based on the feedback, we changed the whole program and we brought in the concept of near-peer mentoring, where two senior students who used to mentor them under the faculty provisions. And this worked a lot because there was a two-way benefit of transfer of learning, because those who were becoming student mentors, they were getting advice from the senior faculty members, as well as they were mentoring the medical students. And gradually, so we can say this is perhaps one of the things which has sustained the culture of trust among the medical students, because ultimately when they are in a time of distress, it is the senior students whom they go first and not the faculty members. At the national level, I would like to say that last year there was these Medical Council of India's discriminatory guidelines for candidates with disabilities, which I wrote a scalping article in Indian Journal of Medical Ethics about that. And after that there was few litigations also, and finally the Ministry of Health amended those guidelines and they changed it. But unfortunately, again, as they say that, the same vicious cycle has started again. If you see today's Times of India newspaper, there is an article where again they have amended, they have made these regulations that a candidate with more than 80% disability is ineligible to do MBBS or MD, without taking into consideration the feedback from the disability sector at all. So again, it's a same process where we have to work further. At the international level, we can say that we are very proud of this initiative, which is our Medical Humanities Journal, which is online, which is peer review and open access. It is research and humanities in medical educations, and initially when we launched it in 6 years ago, we thought that who will write for humanities in India? But we are very pleased to say this, that perhaps we are getting submissions not only from India but many countries outside India also. So there is a lot of hope, if it brings hope to you Gayatri and others, that people are still interested in medical humanities. So this is something which is there. You talked about the medical curriculum, the new competency-based medical education curriculum. There are 3 volumes and 390 pages. You just do a simple search, type the word dignity, and it will return you 0 results. We have this disability legislations. There are 2 legislations, Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Mental Health Care Act. They are based on United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, and the preamble of that is inherent dignity. That word is missing from their ethics module as well as the new competency-based medical education curriculum. So that's why we have this project, Disability Inclusive Compassionate Care, where we actually did focused group discussions with 3 key stakeholders, because we would like to prepare a competency-based curriculum for disability. So we interacted with doctors with disabilities, we interacted with disability rights organizations and medical teachers. We had focus group discussions. Based on that, we prepared various competencies. It was open for feedback. So from 52, we prepared 27 competencies under the 5 roles which MCI has prescribed. So this was recently the launch of these disability competencies. I have the copies I will share with all of you over here. So we have prepared these guidelines which we feel that they are UNCRPD compliant, because the AD Americans with America's Disability Act is very strong, but unfortunately they have not yet ratified the UNCRPD. So they still talked about shared decision making, and that is a very common word. If you see the ADCOM module, it will be there, shared decision making. But in India, our legal legislation mandates supported decision making for including the people with psychosocial disability. So it is mandatory on us to talk about, to involve those people also with psychosocial disability. It has to be supported decision making and not shared decision making. But these things are missing from there. Another thing is that the whole world knows about the section 377. But if you see the curriculum of forensic medicine, which is there in the MCI curriculum, they have actually patented this curriculum. This which they have prepared, competency-based curriculum. If you see the competencies of forensic medicine, it still talks about that lesbianism is a sexual offense, post 377. They still talked about Mental Health Care Act 1987. Of course, the Disability Act is not even over there. So, of course, we have criticized the curriculum, but we are also providing solutions. We haven't seen any disability competencies which involve doctors with disability. So here is a focus group discussion which we did. We will be publishing this paper, and this is something because the 5 roles of MCI, they are in sync with the 6 ACGME core competencies. They are in sync with the 7 roles of CANMEDS, the Canada's medical core competency model. This is an emotional slide. So we are progressing with various partnerships. One of the key partnership is CCDC. Ram, Radha and Ravi are here, my teachers also, and they introduced us to this very innovative concept of experiential learning. Perhaps the best way by which you can introduce humanity, which is theatre of the oppressed. For the past 2-3 years at the National Conference of Health Profession Educators, so we have been doing these theatre of the oppressed workshops to sensitize people towards medical humanities, the medical faculty who are over there. We are very thankful to our reviewers, specifically for our journal Rhyme, who are, some of them are very activist medical students. And this was the article, if you can see, published online on 6th of September, the same day when we had that historical judgment on section 377. So you compare this with something which is there in the forensic curriculum, it is appalling. I mean, how they are not keeping pace with the recent judgments, and they talk about that one of the role of a medical graduate is to become a lifelong learner. This is stark contrast. We have this disarming dialogue series with the University of Chicago, and we have this DD Speak, which is stories of professionalism and ethics as an approach to knowing. Some of you were there, and Gayatri mentioned about this, that we need these conversations not only with those people who are already converted, but also with those students who are, those people who are actually part of this larger conversation. For example, in these workshops which we had, the participants were medical students. There were people who are, survivors, who are transgender activists. So we need to have that conversation with those other people who are there in the community. So that is why we need to have that platform, because the problem with the CPME curriculum is that they did not invite a single suggestion from the real stakeholders, students. We have a partnership with this Delhi Medical Council also, and we have sensitized the various ethics committee members. For example, somebody talked about advanced will. We have a Supreme Court judgment, but many of the people, especially in the medical institutions, they are not even aware about the nitty-gritties of what was there in the judgment on advanced will. So we have progressed with this particular partnership, and I spoke to you about this disability inclusive compassionate care, which we have recently finished. Right now we are working on these 4 things because there will be a new curriculum, of course, and there will be electives also. So our step would be how to devise modules from the streams of medical humanities to make it more interesting and experiential. We do not want to give lectures on disability to make them understand. It has to be a lived experience. We are again having this collaboration with the University of Chicago on supported decision making among vulnerable groups like those who are with chronic pains and those who are from the transgender community or tuberculosis survivors. Dr. Preet Dhaliwal, who is my mentor, she is at the Institute of Humanities at Galveston, and she is working on this project, how to use poetry to examine provider-patient relationships. And this is again something very close to my heart, that we are working on how to prevent suicide among medical doctors. Because we have seen that the various toll helplines which are there, this is a common concern of the doctors, that they do not want to speak to non-medical people who are there, counselors. So can we do something where even the trained doctors can actually help those who are in need for this, so that we can prevent the suicides over there. Over the 10 years, we have found various challenges. Many of you have already highlighted that. Number 1, the biggest question, there are so many lectures which are never taken from the clinical side or paraclinical or preclinical side. But when we go to those disciplines, please give us 3 or 2 lectures. They will not give you a single minute. That is the problem. There is no dedicated time slot within the curriculum. Community medicine has only 6 hours allotted to what you said, but they do not want to give those lectures. So how will you introduce? So we are hoping that with the launch of EdCom, perhaps you might get some time for medical humanities. The critical aspect is that it is competency-based medical education curriculum. You have to check the competency. The problem is humanities uses a reductionist approach. We do not believe in critical, evaluation. So can we actually assess the affective domain? What are the various modalities by which we can assess affective domain? It is a huge question. Journal logistics, yes, we're running the journal for the past 5 years, but recently in January, our journal was hacked for a day from Indonesia. We fail to understand why somebody would get by hacking a journal on medical humanities, which is online, open access, but it was done. So there is a serious threat what to do, because the reason for launching the journal was that all of those, medical humanities journals, they are not open access. They are in BMJ medical humanities, they are in US, none of these are open access. So this was perhaps our avenue, because we also publish articles in Hindi and poetry in Hindi, so that we get enough literature from India which can be used for, say, AdCom module. But when this threat larger than this is, we are running the journal from our own pocket, so that is again a big question. What is the future of this journal? Second, again, Gayatri talked about this optional versus mandatory. Should it be optional? Should it be mandatory? Again, there are different school of thoughts, but I would be happy if you can provide answers to these questions. So with this, I stop over here, and you can, these are the food for thought for you guys, how to take it forward.